Innovation Unplugged from the Alabama Community College System's Innovation Center takes you inside Alabama's workforce development. Join us for enlightening conversations with community leaders and industry experts showcasing experiences, addressing key issues, and celebrating successes in the workforce initiatives across the state. Welcome back, everybody. This is Innovation Unplugged, a production of the ACCS Innovation Center. I'm Houston Blackwood. I get to be a pleasure to be the workforce director for this group. Today, I've got our executive director. I think she had a title change. She's now Chief Operating Officer, Chief of Operations. Yes. I've changed her contact in my phone to Chief Frizzell. Julie Frizzell, regardless, our fearless leader. And by Zoom today, we have the man, the myth, and the legend, all things healthcare in the ACCS, Kenneth Kirkland. How are you?
Hey, Kenneth.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Good. Full disclosure to all listeners, Kenneth and I have known each other for a long time. Our wives worked together at a nursing home in Falkville, Alabama, so we connected. But and so we've navigated different jobs while knowing each other, and he's killing it in his world. He's the expert, and so moved around. So we're excited to have, for personal and professional reasons, I'm excited to hear what we're going to talk about today. But we always like to start, Kenneth, because every guest we think is super interesting. So, and you certainly are, your story, your background. So give us, the Reader's Digest version of where you came from, and maybe not elementary school, but all things that led you to this point professionally.
Unless it gives us stories about Houston.
Oh, no, it did. No, this is a professional podcast. And so, Kenneth.
Yeah, we'll leave those stories out. And well, I didn't start out in healthcare. I actually started out in manufacturing.
Oh.
So my entire family moved from Ohio, and my uncle had a plastic injection molding plant. And so grew up in a family of machinists. And so every summer you worked for family at the plant, and you did plastic injection molding or sweeping floors or trimming parts. Mm-hmm. And then after I graduated high school, I thought I was ready for a 4-year college experience right out of high school. Found out quickly that I didn't have that academic maturity ready yet. And so I came back home and worked for my uncle for about another year. And he came to me and said, I don't want this for you. You need to go consider being a nurse. And so my uncle's mom, had been a nurse for the Firestone family when we lived in Ohio. And
wow, that's cool.
He said, I actually had taken care of my grandfather the summer between 8th grade and 9th grade while he was dying with cancer. And so during the day, mom and my aunt would go to work. And so I'd stay home and take care of my grandfather and do nursing related stuff. And so he said, you did a really good job handling that, and maybe you should try healthcare. And so I came to Calhoun. And back in those days, nursing was not as competitive as it is now. It's always been competitive, but we did open enrollment. So I camped outside the classroom door, and I was number 55 in line. And as the 5 people behind me walked in, the faculty stuck her head out and said, that's it. That's everybody for fall. Come back in spring and try again. And so there was no points and no certain cut scores. And here I am today. I've worked as a nurse. I've worked as a paramedic. And then I actually came back to Calhoun and worked in the EMS program and became the EMS faculty and program director. And then had the opportunity to go down to our system office at ACCS and be the state director of health programs. And then for some reason said, hey, let's go to Gadsden State and do some really cool opportunities in healthcare over there. And so and then an opening came here and kind of came back home.
That coming home thing, I was giving Dr. Hodges the business of the day, and Julie, close your ears. I was on a breakfast panel, and Dr. Hodges was just a fantastic boss. And he was on the show a year ago, maybe. Yeah. And I joked about how I hated to leave him, but he couldn't match what we were being offered at the Innovation Center. But that thought of going home after having gone and seeing things, it has a certain aspect, it's a nice ring of going back to where you started. So what was that like for you? You've gone and you learned all those things, and you did it at the highest level in the state as far as the system goes, and then had your own program at Gadsden. So what was it like coming back? And not only coming back, like what we're trying to say here is that he didn't just come back and take a job. You took over where Brett McGill left off. Mm-hmm. He was a legend in his own right. What was that like?
Well, it's kind of like coming behind a Nick Saban. Uh, I don't want to I hope DeBauer's not listening as you're down there in Tuscaloosa, but
Oh, we hope he is.
and I hope he is. That would be cool. There's a little bit of nostalgia when you open the door and you're coming in and it's man, this is where I started and I get to come back now, and you kind of hope you get to be in a seat to help make some decisions and build on what's been left for you. And getting to see what our other colleges and institutions across the state are doing and being able to bring some of those practices in and not necessarily start brand new things, but build on top of what's being done and do it in newer ways. And really just kind of work with some great people that are still here and some new people too. And so it's different than maybe where you started at an institution where nobody knows you because you're only ever known at the position level that you come in at.
Yeah.
And so here I'm working next to faculty who taught me how to be a nurse, and I'm working with people that are still over in admissions or student services. And so the onboarding was probably not as detailed as what I needed when I got to Gadsden State.
Sure. So a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, we had on a guy from Fire Seeds, and they're
Ben
Cottingham, leadership recruiting. Basically, they're headhunters for leadership positions around the state and a lot of construction. But he talked about they look for people who can and will lead up and down and side to side.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hear you say that transition, and you come back, and now you're the dean in a department where people work who taught you how to be a nurse. So what was that like coming back to that kind of arrangement? How did you emotionally, mentally, professionally manage leading your previous superiors?
So in some cases, like if I was to compare like the last job I had as a dean to coming back into this job to kind of help answer that, when I got to Gadsden State, I really didn't know anybody at Gadsden. And so it was different type of like infrastructure needs and different type of curriculum needs over there. Coming here, it's more of a, you're the resource person, right? You're the things seem, for the most part, are operating well and efficiently. And so there isn't a need to manage as much as it is just kind of lead from behind with, let me give you the resources and help develop what you need. Mm-hmm. And as you'll find, I'm sure, I hope most leaders would agree, most of the time, by the time they get to you, they already know what they want to do. They just want some confirmation that they're on the right path. And maybe there's some little slices that you might be able to add into that to kind of help give them some more empowerment or strength to get what they need done.
It's kind of like navigating through the waters. Like,
yeah,
different things can come at you, but how do we drive the ship? How do I make sure everybody's got what they need?
Yeah, I think what made it a fun challenge at Gadsden State was you needed to build the relationship to be able to get some things done. Here, you're kind of picking up that relationship that you've maintained as you've bounced around the state, and so you have a fresh perspective. And so really, it's just kind of like, hey, have you considered this, or what are we looking at over here? And it kind of helps build a conversation. So it's a little, in some ways, it's easier, in some ways, it's more challenging because it's like, I taught you how to be a nurse. What you mean you're telling me how to do something? So.
Yeah, I never had that. When I went from being a teacher to a principal or assistant principal to principal, I didn't supervise anybody that ever taught me, but I always wondered if I got to go back to Hartselle High School, what that would be like. And that ship has sailed, and I don't want to go back there now. So, well, my son's there. I don't want to be his principal or assistant principal, but I was always curious when you went back what that was like for you. And I think we can relate because when we come in the Innovation Center, I had a lot of workforce background with some construction related things in CDO. Julie had a lot of manufacturing and an ear and an eye and a mind for the hospitality. So and Brandy had the medical side. So we all took these little avenues that kind of owned our early courses and ran them until they got so big that we had to shove them off and then kind of zoom out. So have you seen that too, like with the programs that you ran or taught at Calhoun? When you came back and now you're the dean over all of it, was it hard for you to let your favorite programs just kind of go and be equal to everything else?
Well, sometimes you kind of fight that battle of this is health sciences, right? So we're all kind of on that same equal plane, but you're all doing some very innovative in some unique way. And so it's really just trying to share that love equally across the board. And that there's times and periods where each of them have their day in the spotlight and making sure that they're getting the recognition they deserve. And at the same time, trying to balance those needs that they have too.
So what have you seen, like kind of over the years, change in the area of the state that you're in, relating to health services and programs that you all are providing? Kind of, has the pendulum swung any of, there's now a focus in a different area for health services, and how have y'all been really trying to meet that need and understand that need based on the organizations and providers in that area?
So I think, there's a couple of different ways to answer that. And one of them is kind of pre-COVID versus post-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And, most healthcare folks that are still kind of working through some of those, getting back into clinical facilities. And even though we're 4 years past that, we're still talking about clinical facilities and tracking down vaccination records and those type of things in our area. But pre-COVID, I think we always knew these shortages in healthcare providers were there. I don't think COVID in some ways did anything but highlight those shortages, and if anything, kind of compound those, because for the first few years afterwards, you heard of programs whose application rates were down, and especially post-COVID. And I think it's because we televised everyone being a healthcare hero, and you're watching this stuff unfold through social media and through the news and through all these other areas. And it's like, well, my neighbor had to live in a camper out in the front lawn and isolate away from their family, and they work in healthcare. And so I don't want to do that for me. And so, like I said, I highlighted it. But then there were some great things that Governor Ivey did with the Success Plus plan, and really linking those high demand, high wage occupations and what is those top 40 lists, because that was about the time that the Perkins 5 plan was coming out, and really making sure that are we investing state dollars where they need to be to get the maximum payoff that we can, right? And all health programs provide a benefit some way, but in some ways it required us to be a little more competitive in how we reach out and start looking for funding sources. And for me, in addition to Perkins, I've really learned how to develop grants. And so I think we start seeing healthcare programs pursuing more of the industry credential grants and some of those opportunities that are out there.
And probably even an increase in the availability of grant funding as well, kind of is what we've seen across the landscape for workforce initiatives and workforce grant funding and things like that.
And nursing apprenticeship as well, that's really changed that workforce landscape of that is completely outside the box, because Alabama is the first, and I think we're still the first state to really take pre-licensure nurses and create apprenticeships with those individuals, where other states, you say they have nursing apprenticeship, you're already a nurse, you're just skilling up with a bachelor's degree or maybe even a graduate degree in an apprenticeship. And so it still counts as apprenticeship, but it's not pre-licensure. And so in some ways, as you're trying to be that tip of the spear out there, it's hard to fall back and look at those resources. So I think our health programs, those are those challenges of you're leading in so many different ways. Sometimes there's somebody that we like to call and bounce those best practices off of. And when you're leading those or you're in those, it's hard to do that because you are the tip of the spear, right? So you're really forging new ground in healthcare. And it's just kind of this surreal feeling that in 5 years, you're going to look back and apprenticeship's just going to be this normal thing in healthcare. And 4 years ago, it was like this unsurmountable mountain that seemed of how are we going to match clinical experiences and how are we going to make sure that they're equitable. And what I love is that when you go back and look at those pass rates of, from what I've seen, and no one's really called and said otherwise, that these apprentices are blowing the next generation NCLEX out of the water in the clinical judgment areas. And that's because they're getting that immersive experience.
That's awesome. Way to go. Because those programs, if you didn't have those innovative, thoughts coming in of how do we really think differently, how do we step outside of that box and really provide programs that are going to benefit quickly to the workforce across the state, but how do we make those decisions? Because a lot of things go through accreditation and take time and working together with other organizations. How do we make this work and have that industry input as well?
That was a question at the chamber breakfast of the morning is how the school systems and the Athens State and Calhoun stay ahead of that curve. So you see the need, but you build it fast enough to actually be able to use it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And one of the things I heard Dr. Cox say yesterday at our CRI meeting was about the state of Virginia has these LPN programs that put high school students in an LPN course. So by the
Yep.
time they finish at 18, 19, they're LPNs. And down here, it has had trouble. So I don't know what you know about. I know you know everything about that, but I don't understand all of that because I'm not in nursing. Is there some good answer you could give us? That's, I don't want to get you in trouble or put you on the spot, but actually I do.
Well,
I want to put you on
I
the
can
spot.
talk about it. Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to
So,
know. Yeah.
well, and so part of that rural development, healthcare opportunity money that was legislatively appropriated, not in this most current session, but the session before, was to develop healthcare dual enrollment pathways in rural areas. And each college had the opportunity to submit an RFP for those. And so we submitted one from Calhoun. And so our rural development park, we met with our contractors. We'll begin renovations in January. But by next fall, we'll have 10 dual enrollment healthcare pathways that will all lead to licensure or certification. And so one of those being high school LPN. And so what makes it a challenge, I think, with those high school students, and you know this from working in K-12, Houston, is that they're balancing their high school load too, right? And so a lot of times if they're bused to that site or they've drove themselves to that site, our students on campus here, that this is all they've got, right? So they come on campus, they're here most of the day, or maybe they've got clinical experiences. It requires a little bit of different programming. And so as we've had conversations with superintendents, the ideal student for those programs, you're really not recruiting in their junior year like you traditionally do for healthcare dual enrollment. You're recruiting their freshman year because those one-on-one articulation agreements that are out there for K-12 allow that one-for-one replacement in some of those general education requirements that are the same general education needed for nursing. And so as they take those through dual enrollment, they're still required to meet some of those general education requirements for nursing. And so our goal is that by the time they're between their spring of their junior year, they matriculate into the program, and by the time they graduate high school, you are a high school LPN that has graduated with your high school diploma. And so, our motto has been, as we partnered with like Tracy Turrentine, the superintendent for Morgan County Schools, our motto has been right out of the gate that day one of graduation is not day one of unemployment.
Right.
And you need to at least have a skill that you can do something if you're interested in healthcare. And it's exciting.
That phrase is, and Chris has talked about that is after graduation. Dr. Cox, not Chris. I don't call him Chris. After graduation is the biggest unemployment increase in the state, in the nation. So, and the stuff that Dr. Turrentine, or these people get me confused. Miss Turrentine rattled off the other day about all the programs they're doing in partnership with Calhoun, like machining and nursing and so many different things. I was like, holy cow! Like, she's brilliant. Calhoun's brilliant. So I'm not surprised by any of that. But in that region, that's a huge school system, 5 high schools, so that's really cool to see. What is the, back to our terms, and we get hammered with this all the time about employability. When you have an 18-year-old high school graduate who has an LPN license, who hires those people? And what is their pathway after that?
So when we started having these early conversations, and Dr. Cox and I have had these conversations about high school LPN since I was at the system office. COVID kind of puts a stop on everything, right? And then you get nursing apprenticeship off and going, and then you start revisiting these conversations again. And one of those is, well, are they even eligible to be hired? And so we brought in partners from the Alabama Nursing Home Association, the Alabama Hospital Association, the Board of Nursing, and really sat down and did some pre-homework, because when, like you said, I think you said Virginia is not the only state doing this. And so sometimes I hear, well, we can't do that. Well, what makes it different in Alabama that Virginia's doing it?
Yeah.
And there's some states in our nation that the high school teaches LPN and the college has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so it's important to me that you have that college credential, because as that student graduates, they can keep right on going and matriculate into an RN program, or they're ready to go to work. And if you'd have told me that I'd had that option in high school, I don't know that I would have been ready for that. but there are so many different options because when you look at dual enrollment in healthcare, you have nurse assistant, or do you want to do dual enrollment EMT? And so they have no idea of these other professions until they set foot on a college campus and they're career exploring, or they've done a tour as a senior, or I didn't even know this program was here. And so we're really developing we've got dual enrollment dental assisting and medical lab assistant and all these different and central sterile processing for surgery so that we get people into there and they can career lattice up and stay within that field. And so our hospital partners here locally are excited for this center to be developed and what we're going to be able to do in putting out credentialed individuals. So I don't foresee that they will have an issue because I've never had to look for a job while I've been in healthcare ever. And so I foresee these employers sitting down I told Dr. Hodges, it'll be a healthcare fame model that I'm implementing over at the Rock. And so what we're going to do is match those students with employers and do some really creative things with that there's core exercises geared around healthcare and move them through those models that way.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we put together a FAME mentorship training for exactly that purpose of connecting students, employers, and the colleges to understand what it means for an individual to go through FAME, right? Like, and it's yes, they've got the technical side that they're teaching those students, but what is my responsibility as the employer? What is my responsibility as a student? What is my responsibility as the college to making sure that all of those entities work together for the common good of the student to get the skills they need to get employed at the end, right? It's not a guarantee of a job, but it's putting that student in connection with the right people, like getting the training, getting exposed to the employers and the jobs that are there going to be available. We could build that same training for the health mentor, health service FAME, however you want to call it. But that is something that's so needed is, okay, how does it work? What is my responsibility? How will these individuals get employed upon graduation?
And I think that next step too is looking at sometimes that doesn't mean that's his credit option, right? And it can be a traditional non-credit option or a some form of a delivery that does later articulate to credit and create some pathways for non-traditional students as well. And so we're really trying to kind of work both sides of the house of where's our non-traditional and partnering with that, and then where can we also partner in that dual enrollment area.
I love that. And if I had to explain all that to anybody else, I'd be a stuttering fool.
I'd butcher it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's cool to see and just hearing Ms. Turrentine talk about the day. Now hearing you explain it on this side, knowing how well managed all of that will be. That's exciting because I live in Morgan County and I know that at some point I'm going to need somebody to take care of me or do something for me. So I'm glad of that. We got about 45 minutes on this show, typically each episode, but I want to talk about one of the biggest things, hottest topics in our world, goodness gracious, is the nurse support technician initiative. And I'm going to speak slowly on my end because I don't, there's some changes to it that we've had. And so tell us where that initiative came from, and then we'll mesh in our story about building it and where where we think it's going to go once it's ready.
Yeah. So the nursing support technician that initiative really was born out of practice and the hospital partnerships across the state and the Board of Nursing said we've got to figure out a way to put a credential in these people's hands and have people on the same page when we're talking about medicine, because traditionally they were called patient care assistants. Some hospitals may call them patient care technicians. And that was varied between every hospital. And so when that individual would separate employment and they needed to move to another place, there's not a way to track where those individuals are moving or what does those job occupation outlooks really look like. And so by creating a common term, it's very much, I call it back to the work-based learning handbook, the Office of Apprenticeship and several other state agencies, including ACCS, created about here's what we mean by work-based learning. Here's what an experiential internship looks like so that everybody's speaking the same language.
Right.
And so nursing support technician is that credential that will eventually replace the title of patient care aide or patient care technician. And so I try to tell our folks over here that it doesn't replace nurse aid that's commonly used in long-term care. It is more of an acute care hospital side of this. And so it's really just trying to bring some unity to that system and provide individuals an opportunity to permit and have a credential.
So great point. And I got caught in this yesterday, talking about the original plan for this and then what is now. So someone who goes through the NST training, will they be able to work in a long-term care facility in the role of a CNA, or is that two separate jobs?
It's two separate regulatory agencies. Let's start there for a second, because this is where I think things start to kind of muddy the water when we're talking about they're really nurse aides between both settings, right? And so we're saying nurse aide to separate. Those are the long-term care folks. Nursing support technicians are more the hospital-based folks for right now.
Okay.
And I say right now because at some point, once the system is stood up and there's testing out there and there's credentialed individuals, a state has the ability to appeal to Medicare and ask for waivers. And those waivers will allow NSTs to work in other areas. Right now, nurse aid is regulated as far as who educates them, what credentials does the person educating them have, and how long does that have to be. That's all set through Medicare. It's actually set through OBRA and kind of falls under CMS. And so the Department of Public Health actually helps regulate and enforce those standards. And so from a teaching standpoint, it becomes difficult to find somebody who has nursing home experience to be able to teach those. And Houston knows this because when we work together at Calhoun, you have to have at least a year's experience to be able to teach nurse assistant, because they're going to the nursing home. They have to do a minimum of 16 hours in a nursing home, not an assisted living, to be able to sit the credential.
Yeah.
And so I believe there will at some point be the ability that nurse aides could challenge that exam and become an NST, so that they could get that credential and work that pathway. But eventually in the future, I would hope that NSTs could also work in long-term care.
So you have like a dual crossover waiver almost, or challenge of that process. So, okay. So for right now, and I'm clearing this up in my own head, Kenneth, like, because
for everyone out there,
yeah,
too.
for all of our friends. So I got a message earlier from Brandy, and she left, and she was here earlier on the recording. She said the NST should be loaded in Canvas on Tuesday, so that'll be mid-November. So we're getting ready to roll out that first pilot. And so once it lands in our Canvas, our LMS, that's when we actually say, okay, college, in this case, Wallace Hansville, we're ready to go. And so I got that, and I didn't cry, I didn't freak out, but I know how complicated this is going to be, because it's new. And originally, everyone thought it was going to replace the CNA, and I said that out loud yesterday on accident to a meeting and got my hand slapped by the specialist from the State Department, and rightfully so. So when we talk about this now, we're going to, and here's the question, all that story for the question. So we're going to set up this NST training and train folks who are primarily going to work in a hospital setting and a short-term care, acute care facility. Correct?
Correct. For right now, yes.
Okay. And then in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, after we have some records and some data to show, the quality of the course and how things are running, then we'll be able to put them through some type of examination. Will they just sit for the CNA exam? Is that what we'll do, do you think? Or what will that look like in 5 years when we take the NSTs and get them CNA status?
Well, I think once you get a waiver, and I'm, of course, I always say I'm not speaking for Medicare and I ain't speaking for the Department of Public Health, but I think once a waiver is in place, it allows for, you're still basing reimbursement and you're still capturing charges from a healthcare standpoint,
right?
No matter whether you have that NST credential or you have the nurse aid credential, right?
Okay.
And so as I think Ms. Benson with the Board of Nursing and I have tried to kind of hit that roadshow and talking with employers of, we're really not replacing necessarily one program versus another, as much as providing additional options for people to find the people that they need to work in healthcare.
Okay. I think that soundbite right there will really help us sell that, promote this course. And I hope that if we present at the ACCA later this month, that we say that, but I will certainly keep that in mind as we
And
go
with
out.
the innovative structure, I think you and I, Houston, from a workforce standpoint, have talked about if I'm a workforce director sitting out here in a chair and I'm like, okay, I'm already running a non-credit nurse aid program. There's nothing that says I can't do my non-credit nurse aid program and the student complete the online portion of theory and the quizzes in the module for NST, and that I've structured those skill sessions and those things around when I come out, I can sit both credentials in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to take it that next step further, I can also piggyback both of those individuals, right, or that individual with 2 credentials, right into the medication aid certification and go that additional time period for that. And so there's opportunities for us to add some additional layers of credentials to this that now when they're coming through, boy, we're coming out almost like that Swiss Army knife of, we talked about employability earlier. Not only I've never seen anybody turn down a nurse aid, but at the same time, boy, do I've got some options and I've got some places and doors are even more doors are wide open now.
So, just if I heard you right, just to make sure I get it right, you're talking about someone sitting in a non-credit CNA class, and at the same time, they're going to take that NST theory, and then when they go to the hands-on lab, it's really similar to the CNA validation, if not
Very
the
similar.
exact same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, when we built the skills exam for certification, we modeled the nurse aid exam so that workforce directors and instructors across the state, because the person teaching your nurse aid can also be the person that college contracts with to do the skills portion, that nothing feels so unfamiliar that it just creates more confusion on the ground, and that it just feels like, hey, it's a little different because the skills might change a little bit to like rolling a roll around vital sign machine in there versus taking a manual blood pressure over here. We're still teaching those skills. And because of the complementary skills, I think this is a perfect time to kind of look at what does it look like to blend both of them together and let you come out with both. And then you're really not doing any extra work, right? Because I always look at what's the workload? How many more staff am I going to need? I don't anticipate that you need any more staff than you've already got if you've got that nurse aid program. It really gets into curricular programming and structuring and what that end product looks like.
I agree completely, and I'm thinking from that workforce perspective. When we ran those nighttime CNA classes, they would have done the Tuesday, Thursday for whatever weeks, and then they come for the skills test. And as soon as they do the skills check off, they go straight to take the online and CNA exam. And that whole, we won't get into all that here, but that we've modeled, and we spent multiple days, many hours modeling the NST course to be that same way. What would you say, just for pilot purposes, if we ran this first NST pilot with Wallace Hansville, straight up NST, like let's get all the kinks out of it, and then they're required to run a second lab, through our model. What if we ran the second one in conjunction with the CNA course? And because we do that a lot, we'll run the first one and then we'll kind of test the second one a little bit, tweak it just to see what happens. So what do you think if we did that? And I'm asking the healthcare expert, and I'm asking my boss if we can maybe blend those two a little bit in the second lab and just see how that looks. What do you think? Is it too soon, or should we wait?
Well, no, I think that, I'm thankful that we get to go and partner with Wallace State for the pilot of this exam. But, they've got wonderful programs down there, and their nursing faculty are just, I'm excited to go and work with them in a different capacity and get to really, you call it kind of tweaking. I call it like calibrating, right? Like when we say that a station to test a candidate should take 30 minutes for those 3 skills, where was the hang up in there so that when we deploy this on a larger scale, that it's this nice smooth operation and that the testing manual reflects an approximate time window. And it gives us the idea of, okay, if we know that we're doing this 30 minutes at a time per student, then it helps us in scheduling and it helps us on that inside. And then, like you said, once we've done that, we know it works this way. You've pushed that out and you're already piloting what happens when you do it as a blended format.
Right.
And that blended format, what does that look like? And does it drag it out? Does it, from the data side, I'm really just trying to make sure that we're staying within those norms of no more than 30 minutes and if there was a hang up for something, where was that in terms of, was it just the turnaround time with scheduling it, not necessarily an examination portion? It's just more of a flow portion.
Yeah, I think from my side, I mean, we've always looked at thinking outside of the box and how do we make sure that students get the training they need that they will be successful. So if it is that opportunity to have dual certifications, right, it is going to help them be better employable in the industry and help them get into those job opportunities and say, look, these are the things that I've learned and these are the skills I have. So I think like Kenneth said, it's worth trying. That's how we do things through the Innovation Center, right? Like we vet
No
it
doubt.
through and see how things work. But we also sit and talk about, okay, what were the pros and cons of this? Like how did the support for this? What do we need to make sure that this can be rolled out the most effective and efficient way? So yeah, we're all about trying new things different ways, as long as we're doing it to help those individuals be more successful and give the colleges the support and the supplies and the tools that they need as well. So,
And the students who, as we talk about, those non-traditional, they're not your typical college students. This may be the very first college experience they've ever had. And that's where, I often said, like, non-credit adult education is really more of a ministry than it is anything else, right? And I think even David Walters used to kind of talk about, like, you're serving a whole different group of people that may have never really truly used a computer before. And so doing it blended may help your retention in those programs, because now they're learning in that environment how to use that technology. But you found through that curriculum development that a lot of nurse aid curriculum overlaps what you're already teaching them. And so if anything, they just don't feel like they're learning in that online environment. They're still getting it in that in-person environment. And you're saving that student, retaining them, not necessarily losing them through natural attrition.
Yeah, I didn't think about that part of it. Okay, that's I like that idea a lot. I wonder what they'll say about going through the CNA in-person classes and then the online NST. I'm interested to see how that looks to them. But I think it's a great idea. Yeah. That's why we have this show. Really, some of our best ideas come from this show.
They really have
implementation. Yeah. So,
yeah.
The best ideas we've had have always been 2 or 3 people, and you're standing outside of the coffee pot, or you're just driving down the road and you got windshield time. And I've often found those big things of just, well, who says we can't do that? And then you start digging a little bit more, and you're like, nobody says you can't do it. And so, my measuring stick on my innovative side is, if it's not unethical, it's not illegal, and it's not immoral, the only person stopping you from breaking outside that box is you.
That's right.
That's it.
Well, that's exactly how this show came to be.
Innovation Unplugged was a windshield conversation for hours.
Yeah. I was north of Prattville, and we had this idea. We came up with the whole show, the whole concept in the car that day, because we were all going different directions. And then we should we ask permission? And all of us almost unanimously were like, no, let's just do it and see what happens. So
we went through that 3-step program too that you just mentioned.
Yeah,
let's talk about it.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, most of the time we do that. And we're getting a little short on time, and you've got so much experience. You've had so many different roles. What's the craziest or funniest thing that you've experienced in the healthcare setting, either with a student in a learning environment or in an actual facility? Obviously, names held back to prevent or protect.
Sure. Because now we're asking about swapping war stories at this point, right?
Yeah, I've got no war stories. I just want, it's always funny. I think healthcare is some of the funniest things, because people come in and just, you see them in their most vulnerable state, and I've got several nurse friends, and they tell me stories that are just comical. Of course, I've got a few of my own, but any stories interesting or comical that you think?
With protecting the identities of the innocent and those who are not here to defend themselves. I often use this example as, you really don't know who you're taking care of in the world of healthcare. And I say you really don't know who you interact with in public sometimes. And those ripples carry far beyond, way longer than you could ever imagine. And I took care of a young lady one time, and we'll just leave it at her. And she had fallen at work and broke her wrist. And, by the time she got to me in the ER, hands all swollen, we got to cut her ring off. And, we got to call people from maintenance sometimes if the ring cutter doesn't work, and these big bolt cutters to help get the ring off. And we took care of her. We're chatting it up, having a good day, and she left. And I didn't see that person again until I applied for a full-time job here the first time. And she introduced me to the president as that little boy who cut my ring off with the big bolt cutters.
That's a
And
good one.
and so I always say, thank God you had a great ER experience with me, because it could have went so many different ways.
Thank goodness you didn't cut her finger off. Yeah.
And we try and use that as that teaching experience now of you really don't know, like when you snap back at somebody, like that ripple of that is way beyond that initial encounter that you have with somebody. And it's just what they used to say, you're 5 people away from knowing everyone in the world. And that stuff carries. So
6 degrees of separation, I believe is the phrase. There's a movie about that, but it's not show worthy. Anyway, yeah, you're right. And I can imagine what that was like walking in. I did that when never mind, I'm not trading stories. Kenneth, we've got, we are short on time. So, Calhoun obviously is pushing the envelope, all things healthcare in general, but certainly in healthcare, you've got that simulation space. I forget what you call it, the big room.
Immersion room.
Immersion room. Yeah. And that is phenomenal. We were in the streets of Paris one time. And then we were on a jet, and then we were somewhere else on the Grand Canyon. It was ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
What's the next big thing for you guys at Calhoun?
Sir?
What's the next big thing, the next big program, the next big project at Calhoun for you?
Well, we got a couple of big projects happening. One of them being the Role Development Center down there with Morgan County Schools. And I think that's going to be the biggest one that's on my plate right now. I know from a college-wide perspective, aviation is soon to be, and I know we're working through some processes to be able to announce and start accepting. And we've got respiratory therapy coming to the Huntsville campus, and we're working with Parkway Medical Center and Decatur Morgan Hospital, and Parkway Medical Center will soon become an instructional site for us and be teaching some healthcare training out there and some future add-on certifications. So there's no shortage of work to be done. I remember one time getting to meet with the chancellor, and the very first time I ever met him, he said, if you ever get bored, come and find me. And I can, working for my uncle, I could always read between the lines on what that meant, and I've stayed busy ever since. So
yeah, I know exactly how that story goes.
That's good.
Yeah, that sounds like some amazing expansion into the community. And my word for this year for us, for the Innovation Center, was immersive experiences for our students. And not just the skid steer, but the skid steer with a project, and not just food and beverage, but in the hotel or in the restaurant. And so same thing with healthcare. So I love to see that from my home college. I love to see you guys pushing that envelope and getting into the community.
Can I say Calhoun's my home college too?
Is it really?
Did you really?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Calhoun is the only community college in the state of Alabama that I attended.
Okay.
So yeah, Calhoun Community College on, they had a campus on Redstone Arsenal at one time. And that was for the family and those individuals who worked on Redstone Arsenal campus. But then I also went to a couple classes on the Athens campus a long time ago.
You're only 29.
I know.
It wasn't
that long ago. But yeah, I am. I'm a Calhoun
student. I didn't know that. Yeah. I never attended, but I worked there for a long time. So cool. Kenneth, thanks for all that story. I can't wait to see all those things. I love every time I drive around Decatur, Morgan County, I see a Calhoun sign in a new place. It's like the British Empire. You guys are doing a good job of getting invested. So any other points before we close? Any other items that we haven't shared?
I know our audience is often workforce directors and CTE leaders from everywhere, and hopefully we're attracting some healthcare people to the podcast as well. But for our CTE folks out there, I encourage you to cross the aisle for your healthcare folks. There's someone over there that wants to swap some cool ideas, because our CTE folks have some pretty amazing ways of doing things that I've always enjoyed working on our non-credit side, because you're flexible, you're moldable. There's some different things that you're not held to that semester format, but there's some also processing through input and output and how you're tracking metrics that I think we could probably share back and forth on how we can both help each other. And yeah.
Good advice. Yeah.
I like that. Because we get stuck credit, non-credit.
Yeah.
And we tend to think that we're the only one doing it right.
It's all learning opportunities, right? No matter which it is. So, yeah. what is it? A student?
Well, and Alan Smith out at Gadsden State, and working with you, Doug, and Doug, and Courtney Taylor at one point in time.
Yeah.
Working with different non-credit directors and even CTE deans. I've learned a lot, and so I find myself going to WDI and the ATIA conferences and reading those areas of career tech, ACTE. And trying to really find some places and some innovative pockets where, hey, well, let's bring that back to healthcare and we'll try something at least once.
That's right. You don't know till you try it.
Yep, that's been our motto.
That's it.
Try it once. So cool. We're out of time, so we'll pitch it back to Julie and run this thing down.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. We appreciate your time today, and most importantly, appreciate your time with helping us work on the NST training program, and we are excited to see this roll out here in the next few weeks or month time frame, I guess we could say. But appreciate all the time and effort you've put into that. Your expertise and knowledge has really helped make that course be the best that it can be, and really excited to see the outreach that it's going to have to help workforce. So appreciate your time today and look forward to speaking to you soon. And for those of our audience, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Innovation Unplugged on all podcast platforms. So we appreciate you being with us today. Thanks again.